Joining the show now is my guest, Matt Welch, who is a blogger, journalist, and libertarian political pundit. He is editor-in-chief at the monthly libertarian journal Reason magazine. He co-authored McCain, The Myth of a Maverick in 2007, and more recently co-authored The Declaration of Independence, How Libertarian Politics Can Fix What's Wrong with America. Matt, welcome to the Peter Schiff Show.
Thanks so much for having me on. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for coming on. Hey, in relationship to your prior book on McCain, I never really knew what was so mavericky about McCain, although they tended to use the word maverick almost every other sentence. I remember Saturday Night Live kind of made fun of the use of the word maverick in that campaign. I mean, he seemed to me like a typical politician. You know, Ron Paul was much more of a maverick than John McCain was.
Absolutely. I mean, he was a maverick when he was in the Navy, when he was a flyboy jumping over walls and getting drunk and almost getting kicked out of everything. During his military service. As a politician, he was conventional, except he kept stretching it more and more in the direction of having the state solve all problems. He really thought that we needed to boost our national morality by having more programs, more war, more interventions, and make America the shining city on the hill from Washington.
What's mavericky about that?
Yeah, not much. I mean, back when he was a media darling, it was just that he was saying things that Republicans wouldn't, but that the media loved, like campaign finance reform and anti-cigarette companies and a few other kind of things. And so they love a Republican who sounds like a journalist, basically.
Okay, so that's the definition of a maverick. You know, campaign finance reform, I mentioned one of the single biggest reasons that I chose not to run for office again was campaign finance and all the rules of the FEC, which I hated to have to deal with. I'm still dealing with them now, years after the campaign. And of course, it's what made it so difficult for me to raise money and to run the campaign was the expense of having to report everything and all the restrictions on me, on the use of my business, and my ability to tap into larger contributions from concerned citizens who had means because they were limited in their donations to a small amount of money. And so it's the whole thing is rigged. This whole campaign's finance laws are there to prevent guys like me, from running, or even guys with less means. I mean, I still had to spend about $1 million of my own money, but it wasn't enough. But if you don't have the millions to spend, you have no choice. You have no chance because of campaign finance laws. They're meant to protect incumbent politicians from a challenger
and prevent citizens, individual outsiders in the system from affecting things. I mean, look at the way that people are talking about super PACs in this election cycle. They're talking about it in horror, as if outsiders had the nerve to affect the way that incumbents run against one another. I mean, it's seriously, the language like that in the New Yorker, in the New York Times, every single day, it is horrifying to the political class that an unwashed outsider can spend money and advertise about how a politician is no good. And that, to me, gets to the fundamentally undemocratic nature of campaign finance reform. Basically, it is regulating our political speech, which should be the biggest red flag when we think about the First Amendment. Why did we say Congress shall pass no law? Particularly because of political speech. So it's amazing that we still have to have these arguments, but we do, obviously.
And ironically, and of course this is the truth with all government programs, it was sold to us, the campaign finance reform was sold to us to take the money out of politics. And of course, the exact opposite has resulted. There is more money in politics than ever before with campaign finance reform.
Yes, and it goes actually towards much less towards political campaigns, although the presidential campaigns are always pretty big, but more towards lobbying. I mean, that's where the action is when the government is trying to pass some huge overhaul, like Obamacare, for example. That's when the money just rains down so that the biggest corporations can get in on some corporatism.
The one thing about lobbyists, though, they want to be lobbyists, but they just don't want to admit that that's what they are, because we've got two former lobbyists running for president right now, Newt Gingrich and Rick Santorum. both of these guys made money peddling the influence that they acquired during their tenure on Capitol Hill.
And not just that. I mean, lobbying is not by definition a dishonorable profession. But what the hell was Gingrich lobbying for? I mean, getting paid $1.6 million from federal housing authorities? No. I mean, that was the root, as you have well, documented and talked about in your whole career. That's the root of the financial crisis there. So, on the question that is the most important thing, he was on the wrong side, taking our money so he could keep peddling this just awful and status quo.
Yeah, which I think brings me to the discussion of your more recent book on libertarian politics, solving our nation's problems. I mean, I agree that our nation's problems need to be solved by free market solutions, which would be associated with a libertarian philosophy, because our problems are rooted in the opposite of libertarianism. It's statism. It is government that has dug us into this hole, and unfortunately the same policies that created the hole are the ones that we're using to dig it deeper.
Yeah, which is, again, it's an argument that we have to have every day. But unfortunately, what's going to happen is that this discussion is finally going to be foisted upon us. It's going to be an external shock. We're going to wake up one morning unable to sell bonds the way that we were used to. We're going to have to suddenly pay premiums, the likes of which we cannot currently contemplate. And it's only going to be then, I think, that we focus attention, unless we see a new breed of politician more in the likes of, let's say, Senator Rand Paul, who came to Washington running on, we have to tackle our entitlement time bomb right now, running on, we have to cut military spending right now. There are a few people like that coming into Washington, but there needs to be a majority of people like that coming into Washington. And living here, man, I got to tell you, there's no indication that that's going to happen anytime soon. So we've got to change. We've got to change the dialogue, though, from, we're leaving these debts to the future, to our children and grandchildren. It's not about the future generation. We are the generation that our grandparents left these problems to. We are the generation that is inheriting the problems. We cannot kick the can down the road anymore because there's no more road. We're stuck with this can, and we have to deal with the consequences of the fact that for generations, politicians postponed the consequences for us. What I'm struck by is that every sitting politician in power right now actually admits that. Just do a whitehouse.gov search on the word unsustainable and then cancel out all of the environmental references. President Obama has said our current fiscal trajectory is definitionally unsustainable. Ben Bernanke has said that. Timothy Geithner has probably even said that, as hard as that is to believe. They all know. I mean, the arithmetic is clear as rain, if that makes any sense. It's coming down on us, and everybody realizes
I know.
And almost nobody.
But what is their solution?
They don't have
their solution is we have to make the problems worse before we can solve them.
Yeah, that there's no way that we could tolerate the type of hard medicine that we need to have. I mean, at the beginning of this financial crisis, when George W. Bush stood in front of the cameras and said, normally I believe in free market capitalism, but from that moment, we knew that we were in a terrible, terrible new place. And that new place says all of the principles that we might believe here, not just as a Republican or conservative or liberal or anybody. It's at the American understanding of capitalism, how that works. We're going to have to table that for the moment. People lost their faith in the ability to use things like bankruptcy, letting people fail for their own bad decisions. We lost faith in that, and because of that, we're in this constant kind of pushing it off until one day the sky's going to open up and we can finally have these kind of policies.
Well, unfortunately, we lost faith in capitalism a long time ago. That's how we got into this mess. We started with the premise that the government had to guarantee mortgages, that we couldn't allow mortgages to be priced in a free market. We couldn't allow credit to be allocated in a free market. We needed the government manipulating it, guaranteeing all these loans. We said we couldn't let interest rates be set in the free market. We needed a central authority to artificially centrally plan what interest rates should be, and we picked a very, very low rate. So we gave up capitalism a long time ago, and that's what created the problems. What Bush should have said is, it's time to go back to capitalism that we abandoned. Instead, they abandoned it even more.
Yeah, and it's going to take another generation to unwind that. But as we're saying, it's going to happen on our watch right now. That come to Jesus moment is coming right at us, and so what we all need to do is to get ready and provide the intellectual tools ready. We're always in the pages of reason saying, okay, how would you actually unwind Fannie and Freddie in 5 years? And we war game out various scenarios. Let's get this thing done because we have.
Why wait 5 years? Why not just go cold turkey and get rid of them?
Yeah. I mean, that is the preferred outcome, right? No, we're also trying to talk in a way that can maybe make sense to people who are within shouting distance of power as well. But it's like what Rand Paul says. He has a 5-year plan for balancing the budget, and then he apologizes for it because he says, hey, we should actually do this year by cutting $1.4 trillion, and let's start over.
Yeah, and in fact, the narrative is we got to deal with the problem, but if we do it now, it's going to be too painful. We need to let the economy get really, really strong, and then we'll deal with it. Well, the implication is it can even get strong based on these problems, and if it's painful to deal with it now, it's going to be much more painful to deal with the problem when we've made it deliberately bigger on purpose.
Let's look what happened the last time the economy was really, truly strong or close to it, 1999, 2000, right before the tech bubble burst. What happened?
All right, well, we'll have to hold that thought. We'll pick that up right where you left off and talk about that when we return from this brief message. This is Peter Schiff talking with my guest, Matt Welch, author of the recent book, The Declaration of Independence, How Libertarian Politics Can Fix What's Wrong with America. Before the break, Matt, you were going to start to tell us a little bit about the opportunity we had in 1999, 2000 to address some of these imbalances. And unfortunately, we not only did not seize that opportunity, we decided to make them worse.
Absolutely. We spent the windfall, and by we, I mean actually not you and me, but various politicians. I'm from California originally, and the governor there, Gray Davis, just started handing out incredible contracts and pension benefits and all these things because they had a dot-com windfall of tax receipts. And we saw that play out all around the country, even in the little period between 2002 and 2007, which was mostly, it was a non-recessionary moment at the very least, and unemployment was down. Some people were doing pretty well. In that period, states increased their spending by 80%. Think about that. It wasn't hard times. It wasn't because they had more services to provide. It was just because, hey, look, money. Let's spend it. And so when you spend money that way and just throwing it out the window on things like public employee benefits, you're not actually addressing any of the underlying things that are coming down the pike that everyone recognizes is a problem. So we have.
And of course, nobody recognizes the temporary nature of that revenue because it was associated with an unsustainable bubble. And once the bubble burst, that Congress would be deprived of that gravy train. And then, of course, the bubble burst. And what did we do? Well, the president told us to go shopping.
Yeah, and it's not as if we didn't see these things coming. The Congressional Budget Office, all kinds of congressional research services have been churning out white papers for decades, saying, "Hey, look, the baby boomers are going to retire. We've got a problem on our hands." The entire mortgage industry is a farce and doesn't make any sense. It's been effectively nationalized. We have the mother of all moral hazards bubbling up on the horizon, and no one is incentivized to do anything because in politics you're just trying to win the next election, so you buy off votes, and we create this system. And it's the incredible thing to have to grapple with and fight against is that people think, oh, well, the solution to the problem that was created by this is more like this. I think more and more Americans actually are coming around and realizing that ain't the solution, and they're looking for any and all politicians who are going to talk about that.
And if you look at the crazy thing, you go back to 1982 when we had a crisis in Social Security in that the government was close to being in a position that we're already in today, where Social Security revenues were exceeded by the outlays, and it was a crisis, and we had a commission, and the solution was a big increase in payroll taxes to try to bridge that gap. Well, now we're actually running in the red. We're actually at the point that we were afraid of reaching back then, where the government is already spending more in Social Security benefits than it collects in taxes. And what is our solution? Well, we cut payroll taxes even more.
Yeah.
And we exacerbate the current shortfall and do nothing about the even bigger looming long-term crisis.
David Stockman, the former Reagan budget director, has a pretty interesting take on this. I'm not sure if I agree, but it's definitely worth talking about, is that it's immoral to run a deficit, period. That if we're going to have this government that costs 40% more than we're actually currently paying for it, we got to hike up those rates so that we know what we're getting, that it's immoral to pass on the interest payments to everybody. And we need a reality check. I mean, that's the truth.
Well, I would agree.
Mitt Romney,
I would agree that there's no excuse for the deficits, because the government has a way to finance the spending. It can raise taxes, and the spending is benefiting this generation, and so the taxes should be borne by this generation. To say that we're gonna have all these benefits and pass on the cost to the future, that is immoral. And of course, I'm arguing all the time that our children and grandchildren, to the extent that we actually did try to pass on this burden to them, they wouldn't shoulder it. They'd leave the country and they'd go someplace else.
Yeah, and just look at where we're headed down right now politically. I mean, Mitt Romney is running as precisely the guy who's going to continue telling us the fable. He is really actually running to Obama's left on Medicare. He complains that Obama has cut Medicare. He ran to Rick Perry's left on Social Security. Oh, you can't call it a Ponzi scheme. He says every day, I'm going to cut, cap, and balance the budget. No, you're not. He has no credible plans for tackling any of these issues, and he wants to lock in defense spending or military spending at 4% of GDP forever, which is an insane idea to begin with. And he says that we've cut down to the bone dangerously. So he's not addressing any one of the big ticket spending items.
Yeah, I hate it when Republicans criticize Obamacare on the basis that it cuts Medicare. I mean, come on.
And he's going to win the nomination with that argument. We should reflect on that for a second and ask ourselves, was there a Republican Party that was ever serious about cutting government and limiting government, both on a moral sense and a fiscal sense? We haven't actually seen that from the Republican Party in generations, I think.
Yeah, I mean, there were Republicans who opposed Medicare before it was passed. The problem is the minute one of these entitlements comes in, everybody is in favor of it, even the ones that were opposed to it before it was enacted.
And let's remember what Republicans did when they controlled Washington, D.C. 8 years ago. They passed Medicare Part D. And a lot of, Rick Santorum, who's now talking about how freedom is the number one issue, except when it's freedom I don't like, he was right there supporting things like that. So we can't...
Well, remember, freedom is important, but he's also a team player. And that's playing on the team is more important to him than freedom. So,
right.
Because we played some sound earlier where he actually told somebody in the crowd, well, if you want limited government, vote for Ron Paul.
Yeah, and Mitt Romney says something similar, like, if you want an expert on the Constitution, my good friend Ron Paul is over there. I mean, it's a sign, I think, of how the Republican Party has gone adrift. Yes, Ron Paul made the Final Four, and that's an amazing thing. He's gotten twice as many votes, basically, as he did last time around. He might yet make a Final Three or even a Final Two, depending on if he can step on some other people's fingers on the lifeboat of presidential politics. But ultimately, his faction, one, isn't very Republican to begin with, and is not at all guaranteed that they're going to be voting for the eventual nominee. But two, is treated as a fringe within the Republican strain in favor of Santorumism, which is kind of a George W. Bush on steroids. Compassionate conservatives. We need to, intervene militarily in Syria and Iran and God knows what part of the jungles in South America. So yes, Ron Paul's out there and he's making a noise, but it's a limited noise within the Republican tent, and it remains to be seen.
Although I would argue that. with a lot of the Republicans that make a difference with the delegates, he's doing a lot better than he's doing in the popular vote. I think I've seen by some accounts that Ron Paul is actually in second place right now when it comes to delegates. Not winning in the caucuses, but the actual amount of delegates that he's going to end up with would put him in second place. But hey, Matt, thank you very much for coming on the show. Good luck with your book. Look forward to having you on again at some point. Everybody else, we've got another full hour.